Mark. How are you? Welcome to September.
It is indeed the wonderful month of September, and I don't know what it's like in DC, but up here it suddenly got very cold.
Yes, it's chilly this morning, like 50. It was shocking.
Yeah, it's like insta-fall. So I've been trying to keep tomatoes going after we had that big storm, because it kind of like ripped them all out and had to replant them and put them back. And I'm just holding on for that last crop of tomatoes. And now basically I go out there and you can almost feel the tomatoes looking at me going, dude, what happened? It's freezing.
What's going on? What happened to this weather change? Are you back to school? Where are you in your school opening, both at home and then at school at Brown?
Well, we're both back to school. So
Okay.
my kid's back at school, and hopefully that'll last. And I'm back at school, and hopefully that'll last. So we'll see where it goes.
Are you doing in person or are you doing both? Hybrid?
Yeah, I'm
teaching?
doing in person. So part of the reason for this is I came over here a very long time ago as an international student.
Mm-hmm.
And the law about international students has been quite clear for a long time. It's not just a sort of a tizzy by the Trump administration. You can't get a student visa, come here and then go online. Right?
Yes.
Because that would just be a huge bypass of the entire legal framework of immigration. So you need to have FaceTime. So basically, if people like me don't step up and do face-to-face classes, then the next generation of me don't get to happen.
Right.
So I feel kind of duty-bound to do it.
Yeah.
So hopefully I don't die of COVID.
My fingers are crossed for you. I mean, it's been interesting, of course, watching the universities open, and especially the big public universities, and how that has worked out. There's an article in the paper with the University of Illinois, and they've done the most with these big, huge undergraduate populations of 30,000, tons of testing, tons of quarantining. And the article in the paper highlighted that, of course, the one thing that the scientists and the epidemiologists didn't consider were that if you're 19 years old and you're COVID positive, you're still going to go out and you're still going to go drinking with your friends. So it was just an interesting way to think about, everyone staying inside their homes, except for those 19-year-olds.
So, I mean, this is one of the things that we've spoken about before. I mean, there's all this different metrics you can focus on. The case incidence, right? How many of them are there? Case morbidity, how many of them are dying, right? And then, of course, you can then look at the underlying background infections, right? So the people who don't actually have any symptoms. And all of this skews by age, as we know, right? So you can imagine a world in which you have particularly undergraduate populations, very, very high rates of infection, hardly anyone sick.
Yeah.
Right? But then people who are the old staff who work there are walking into a very, very hazardous situation.
Yeah, and the old professors too, if they decided to come to the classroom.
Right. Hence why most of them are doing it online, right?
Yeah.
So, this is the world that we're in. But what else is going on this week? Let's not get bogged down in COVID. That's a constant. What's the variable?
Yeah. Well, these are constants as well. So, of course, the terrible fires in the West with those huge smoke plumes that you can see from space. Hurricane Sally in Louisiana, Mississippi, in the Gulf Coast area. With an additional at least 3 other storms that I think NOAA is tracking that are brewing in the Atlantic. There are 2 more names, Mark, in the alphabet that they'll use after Sally, and then they have to go to Greek alphabet to start using names. So this has only happened one other time in 2005 that they ran out of names and had to go to Greek alphabet. So that's some trivia for you. Of course. A part of a big ice shelf in Greenland has fallen off. And then, COVID numbers were really high yesterday. So, we're really looking good here in terms of planet Earth.
So are you telling me there's a problem with the environment?
Well, so no, it's cyclical. It's just a cycle that the planet is going through.
It's just a cycle.
Not done
as
by
the
humans.
president said today, look, it's going to get cooler, which is true because it will become fall.
Yes.
And then it will become winter. The only thing is in the southern hemisphere that doesn't work because it's the other way around. So they're going to start to get warmer. So actually, I did check this out, and apparently last year was the first time, maybe it was the year before, whereby the fire seasons of Australia and the west coast of the United States actually overlapped.
Oh, geez.
So now they're actually just on fire all the time.
Constantly.
And then Siberia is on fire all the time, right? That one's even bigger, right? But it's in the middle of nowhere, so we tend to forget about it. Well, we tend to forget about it when it's happening in our own country. But that one's really screwed up because the permafrost melts what you've got is peat. and peat is filled with methane, which is 100 times worth for warming, and a whole bunch of other stuff. Plus, that's warming up, guess what? Dead pathogens that have been buried in the ice for millennia.
Right. Yeah.
So it's just, going on. And all of this is going on, and remarkably, it takes this fire in California and in Oregon for the first time for the president to be drawn into a discussion about climate change.
Yeah, and science. Well, I guess he's been talking about science a little bit, but yes, relatedly so. And of course, his response when some of the experts said, this has to do with climate change, he said his reply was that science doesn't know. And the scientist said, well, science does actually know.
Actually, we really do know. We certainly know better than you do.
Yeah,
exactly. But the thing is, it's just not a thing. This segues, I think, into the election, right? So people on the Democratic side are a bit puzzled. And they're a bit puzzled, and they have been puzzled since about 2016, in fact, about the fact that Trump's support just doesn't go down.
Yes.
Right? It doesn't go up much, but it just doesn't go down. So you can pick anything, whether you pick the protests, whether you pick climate change, just do a whole list of stuff that Democrats care about, right? And then they talk about that, and it just doesn't penetrate, right? It's just not what they're interested in, or they actively suppress it and push away from it. So the interpretation that you get from this, is, they're a bunch of deplorables, or they're all racist, or whatever it has to be. I think the climate one's a fascinating one for this one, right? Unless you are just like a completely selfish, childless boomer, then basically you have to give a shit about future generations because you have one living in your house. So how is it possible that you just tune that out? It is not an issue. It's propaganda. It's just bullshit. The scientists know what you're talking about. So I think I've mentioned this before. If there's about 12 states in the United States that are utterly dependent on the extraction, refinement, and transportation of carbon as their main business model. Think about Alaska.
Yeah.
Think about North Dakota. Think about South Dakota. Think about Texas. Think about West Virginia. Think about Louisiana, right? And they're all Republican. So what you're saying to the working classes in that place when you talk about the environment, what this says to them is, we're going to shut down your jobs, we're going to get rid of your trucks, we're going to take your guns because we don't like those ever, and basically your way of life is awful and you're all racists.
Yep.
Right? So the Democrats think that they're pitching a very positive vision, and to their base it is. But it's got to the point in the country that that vision is completely anathema to the other people on the other side of the divide.
It just does not match reality. You're exactly right in terms of what someone in Alaska or Louisiana experiences as they step out of their Ford F-150. And even these gigantic storms, they're thinking, or the permafrost. I mean, it was 100 degrees in Siberia this summer. I mean, it just doesn't, there's this thought pattern that this will continue to exist because this is just one of the many things that's happening in a changing world. And it sounds pandering and condescending, but when exactly does the reality of what's happening around the globe actually match up to what's happening outside your house, your home, and the window that out onto the world? It's just hard to see how that matches up. And especially when those realities are so very different. So I'm just thinking about, I just went home to see my family in rural Michigan, and the reality there is there's no COVID. Everyone's eating inside, very little mask. But the other thing is, to the point where we started in terms of numbers, the case rate has been pretty low too in my home county. So there hasn't, just by sheer luck, there hasn't been a huge outbreak, and so they have been able to do all these different things. The thing that is most fearful for them is law, order, anarchist, rioters. I heard that over and over again. The anarchy and the rioters, and they are coming for you in small town America. So you better get your handgun ready because they're gonna come and burgle your house. And I'm thinking, this is not true. And so those different realities, I think, are so important. And how do you speak to both of them?
Well, particularly because you can only live in one. So let's think of the hypocrisy on the Democratic side here. So some data released last week showed that for the first time ever, SUVs are the second biggest polluter for climate change in the world.
Holy cow.
Right? Just SUVs is one class, right? Now, are SUVs a uniquely red state phenomenon? No. Pickup trucks maybe, right? Like big-ass Mercedes SUVs, luxury SUVs, Volvos, the whole lot. No, they're all over blue states. the people who care about the environment. So if you're being told off about having an F-150, what about you driving around this thing? Oh, it's a hybrid. Oh, well, that makes all the difference.
Right.
All that does is basically give you a boost on the highway, right? So there's a way in which you can't even get into and see the other side, because it seems to be zero-sum against you. You're going to get to keep your fancy SUV, but I'm the one who has to lose my job in the extractive industries and stop driving this truck. There always seems the asymmetries on the other side. And first of all, the Republicans have no interest in solving that problem. To them, that's an advantage. But the Democrats don't seem to be able to recognize that and actually weaponize it to their advantage.
No, and I think two different thoughts I've had is that your point about Trump's approval numbers. I've been tracking his economic approval numbers, and they hover at around 50%. I mean, through COVID, they've been at about 50% right now. He's at 48%. But I mean, they're generally, people have really thought, voters really have given him a break and thinking the economy's going to come back. It's going to be some sort of alphabet shape, whatever it is, and really giving him a break on that. It hasn't gone down. And I think that's, I mean, if you're in the Trump campaign, that's a good number for you, that people are still approving of your economic numbers or your economic plans. But then, I mean, the point about SUVs, and I mean, you cannot speak to that unless you have some sort of authentic candidate. And I think the Democrats are reaching with Joe Biden to say, of course, he's from Scranton, and somehow that sounds that's not fancy, like
yeah, but
Los
he left
Angeles.
Scranton when he was 12.
I know. But this is right, I mean, that's the allure of Joe Biden, that he's the everyman candidate. And you think, but you know, Democrats are like, we got nothing else, so we're going with Biden. But to your point, there's no real plan to communicate that. It's just getting a candidate from a place that doesn't sound fancy or isn't an urban center, and being able to communicate it in that way, just through symbolism.
Yeah, so if you think about Trump versus Biden on this level, right? So Trump is homophobic, sexist, by many measures racist, if not borderline so. He's beyond dog whistling, at least. He's intemperate, he's vulgar, he's a serial liar. Chalk it all up, right? So are a lot of Americans, right? So basically he replicates their own thoughts and patterns of behaviour. So let's think about this. Today there was a big joint letter put in The Guardian by a whole bunch of social organisations saying, Biden, please, there's $1.7 trillion in student debt. Right? It affects everybody. It's a huge drag on the economy. If you care about racial justice, this is a huge put on minority populations. Study after study shows this, right? This is an easy thing. You have got the authority to do this either through the Fed or the Department of Education. You can just commit to this. You will mobilize your base. You're great. And I read that and I thought, I wonder if they remember, of course they do, that the 2006/2007 personal bankruptcy reform that made it illegal to default on student loans, one of the signatories was Mr. Joe Biden.
Oh, geez.
Right. So, you know what? Trump may have all those negatives, but those negatives are positives to a lot of people. It's very hard to come back and say that, like, I'm the great reformer when you dug half the ditches that made the problems.
Well, and it's not even maybe that they're positive, it's just that they're neutral. I know he's a clown, but he's my clown. Or, you know, he does all that, he lies, but I know he's looking out for me and in their internal calculation.
But even if he's not looking out for me, he's not sort of like pretending he cares about me in such a way that I don't believe a word he says.
Yeah.
All right. I mean, that's what I take away from when I'm watching a lot of what Democrats are saying. I'm just saying, how does this relate to like my working class friends?
Yeah.
And I go out and talk to them, and basically, you know, I'll say to them, so, you know, if you say Democrats, right, what does that say to you? And basically they'll come up with a list of policies or a list of talking points that they regard as not talking to them.
Yeah. Yeah. Or a sense
it's not about their lives.
Yes. Or this attitude that they're uppity and I know better than you, and now I'm going to point my finger and tell you what you should do. It's here's my confession for the pod is that, so I watched all like 10 or 12 hours of the RNC and the DNC, and I have to say I had to go on like a no news after the RNC because I was having really weird nightmares about just, you know, stuff from both conventions, and I just started to think,
did they blend together? Did it become this multi-headed hydra?
They did, yeah, exactly. And, you know, there are dragons in my dreams. But in any case, I just sort of thought, you know, for so many of us that just watch the news all the time, this is where we get our skewed sense of stuff as well, and that neither one I thought represented what I actually experience in real life. But I also thought I was like a good psychological case in terms of what happens when you watch all of that back to back.
I mean, this is an old story as well, though, that Arlie Hochschild had a really good piece on this about 2 weeks ago. I think it's on my Twitter feed, whereby she says, what is it that the Republicans do? They don't deal in facts; they deal with emotion. And they're really good at doing it. And the Democrats still have this thing about, well, if I just tell you the facts, right? Well, you live in a world of social media and, inverse facts and post-fact world, etc. So that's not going to work. Plus, we don't trust you. So even if their facts are tainted in that way. But the other thing and we were talking about this just before we started recording, that the other thing that the right are really good at everywhere, not just Republicans, is creating moral panics.
Yes.
And this whole thing about, the anarchists, the rioters, whatever, in rural Michigan, what are they going to do? Hire a bus? I mean, how are they going to get... Is there anarchist bus lines out there? Are they going to go, hey, Bob, farmer, can we get some milk bottles? We need to go on a riot. Oh, shit, we don't have any petrol for our Molotov cocktails, right? I mean, it's clearly nonsensical, right? The FBI tracks hundreds of right-wing groups that actually murder people. There's hardly any deaths tied to direct left-wing violence. Antifa is a myth as well as being an organisation. And it's wonderfully reminiscent, I think, of the late 1920s in Germany, when von Papen, who was, I think, then the German Chancellor before Hitler, managed to convince the German public that the extreme left was the danger, not the extreme right. Well, look what happened 5 years later.
Yeah. Yep. It hits right to the heart of little old ladies who are scared. They are scared, and so I'm gonna go buy my little handgun. Yes, it does.
Fear works.
And when it's repeated to you over and over and over again when you're homebound because COVID, like that becomes your reality. And I mean, and I understand it. It's hard for me to relate to. I understand it, but it's hard for me to relate to.
But that's classic, because in a sense, as a Democrat, what you do is you go, yeah, I get that, but I just can't relate to it. But it's like, that's the people who are going to vote, right?
Oh, yeah.
You have to accept it and get into it and deal with it on some level. Otherwise, you've lost them. You've completely lost them.
Yeah, and to your point, like, how can the Democrats use symbolism they're trying to do this and think about the emotional side of stuff, because you're exactly right. That's just a total emotional response to what's going on. And of course, voting is already happening. Ballots were sent this week in Pennsylvania. They're being mailed out in Michigan. So all of this is happening right now. So it will, the early voters are the people who know, and they're not going to change their mind, right? So it's the strong partisans that are voting right now. And so any of the stuff that happens subsequently, whether it's Bob Woodward's book, which I don't really think probably matters to very many people, except, people who are in the Beltway or wherever. And then the debates, you just think that we're here on these two tracks, and that's where we're going to stay.
Exactly. And we will be back every 2 weeks to update how far down the tracks we're heading towards the train.
And we have 50 days left, so it seems much further away than that.
Wow. That's crazy. All right, so apparently the Trump campaign spent $800 million on fancy cars.
Oh yeah, there's the hit piece in the Times around all the frivolous spending that the Trump campaign has gone on, from super fancy sports cars for the now deposed campaign leader, and fancy meals, and trying to spending tons of money to raise money that just never came through. So it was kind of just the piece of, they had, I think they had $1 billion at some point, which seems insane to me, but anyway, they have spent it down to the point where now it's thought that they're pulling back on ads in battleground states because they're trying to save funds for when we get deeper into October. I think the state of play right now is simply that the polls are tightening, and Democrats are bedwetters and the hand wringers, and so they want to say, start pulling their hair out. But everyone expected the polls to tighten. It really just, this is the most obvious point, but it really comes down to who is going to mobilize their voters. On your point about student loans, that would get so many young people that we need to show up at the polls to actually cast a vote
to
from
show
the
up,
Biden perspective, to actually do that.
Why would you not do that, right? And you're basically handed, through the CARES Act, $2 trillion to American corporates to promise not to lay off workers for 6 months. That's now gone. They're all getting laid off. We've taken the money. Thanks very much. We're fine. There's $1.7 trillion that would make a massive difference in the lives of 55 million Americans. Yeah. And it's the right thing to do, and you won't go near it.
Yeah. And it's so it's so simple, straightforward. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's like, do you want to win? I mean, you have to mobilize people. And Trump does it brilliantly through emotion and fear. You could do it basically by signaling to young people that you actually get their concerns. Or you can basically hang out with Nancy and talk about PAYGO, which is what they want to do.
Well, it's so interesting. You're right. Do you want to win? I think that's a really good question. So jumping over the ocean for a second, because I have been trying to keep up on this, but I don't know what happened exactly to my brain, but what is happening with Brexit right now? Because there's the year-end stuff. Is it just sorting out the customs, the Northern Ireland, the economic, or is it the like a rabbit in someone's hat that I don't even understand?
Carrie, what happened to your brain was Brexited.
And then also from the RNC and DNC.
The closer that you get to it, the worse the impact is.
I see.
Right? It's like some kind of crashed UFO that gives off death rays. If you walk towards it, it will do you irreparable harm. All right, so what's actually happened is, again, let's wind this back for everyone who's listening. Here is the basic rationale of Brexit. The European Union controls us. That was never true. Okay. We need to leave because then we'll be able to get better free trade deals. But you already have free access to the largest free trade group in the world. Anything else has to be second best. Right, anyway, on with Brexit. Let's get Brexit done. Okay, so you get Brexit done. He had this brilliant phrase for it, which was so in the 1970s, an oven-ready Brexit. Right? I mean, who even talks that way, right? So we have our oven-ready Brexit. Turns out we're not at all ready for Brexit because we don't even really know what it is that we want. But the one thing we do know is that the agreement that we signed, called the withdrawal agreement, that begins the negotiations, we don't want that. So we're going to break our own agreement about getting to an agreement.
Is that where you then had some ministers resign because it was breaking the law?
And every living British Prime Minister and a few dead ones actually came back from the grave to say, no, don't do that, because that makes us look like charlatans and idiots. To which Boris said, are you describing me? And that's basically where we are at this point. Now, there's two ways of reading this. This is all part of some master strategy because Boris really knows that when it comes down to it, you have to scare the French and the Germans into giving them the deal that they want. Now, I would believe that if I thought it was an ounce of strategic thinking there, or that the Germans and the French actually have something to give Britain. The sticking point seems to be this thing about state aid. It's always about state aid because they have this idea of levelling up the country, and somehow they're going to have the next Silicon Valley, and it's going to go basically across the Pennines from Sheffield to Manchester to Liverpool, and that's going to be the global centre of AI. So they want to be able to chuck tons of taxpayers' money that they don't have because they've all spent it on COVID at these new industries, right? Now, the problem with that argument, if you spend 5 minutes looking at it, is that the UK currently spends much less than France or Germany on state aid. So they've got a way to go before they're even in trouble. So the closer you get to it, the less sense it makes. And that's always been the case.
And the leveling up is a way to think about the economy and getting it like super like high powered and running on all pistons and like that sort of stuff.
It's how Tories talk about inequality. So what happened was basically Corbyn was sort of so demonised in the press and so mistrusted by his own party that they torpedoed the electoral campaign from within, and he would never have won for various reasons, whatever. And a lot of the white working classes, just as in the United States, aren't that comfortable with immigration, don't actually think that other people's interests are the most important thing, what about us, etc., etc. And One Nation Toryism speaks to them. So all these northern constituencies, it's just like the blue wall, right?
Sure.
Fell, and they voted for Boris. So now there has to be payback. Well, what's behind that? It's the same in most countries. You've got these metropoles, for example, New York, LA, San Francisco, right? Chicago to a certain extent. Houston, the Houston area. They're the growth nodes, and everything else isn't generating growth, right? Where your parents come from is not a growth node, right? People leave, capital leaves, right? It's all going to these big metropolitan hubs. And in Britain, this is super concentrated. Everything is London. Mm-hmm. London creates the underlying growth for GDP. It's called GVA, growth value added. And everybody else is GVA negative, which means that the entire country lives off of transfers.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha.
Right? So leveling up is creating the conditions for positive growth in these regions so that it's not just about transfers from London, right? And I agree with that sentiment, but as a Scot, it's actually brought me to the point where I have to say that I'm finally come round to the idea that Scotland's future really has to be as an independent country.
I saw that on your Twitter feed.
And here's why. If you think about this for 5 minutes, what it means is Scotland effectively lives on transfers from England. Right? If you took those transfers away, it would basically be insolvent. That's not a good position to be in. Secondly, when the British elites talk about levelling up, they're talking about Manchester, Liverpool. That's the north, right? It's just like when they talked about it in Game of Thrones, the north, right?
Yes.
The north is really the north of England. There's nothing beyond that. They're not interested in levelling up Scotland. This is like some small appendage they couldn't give a shit about, right? So why would you want to have that as your future? I mean, anything's better than that.
Well, on this point, I was thinking about in terms of climate change, and then Dan, one of our producers, highlighted, climate refugees. And so I was just reading a little bit about that. And so the real estate hotspot that some have cited is Duluth, Minnesota. So maybe Manchester does become a real estate hotspot when you think about climate change. And that, I'm not sure what the projections are for London, but as the coast actually moves in further into the interior for the UK. I did think that was kind of interesting in thinking about what does that mean for, we've talked about this in the past, real estate in Florida, etc. But does that spur growth in these areas, or is this just like 50 years away, or just a total pipe dream too?
So there's an interesting piece by an Australian economist called John Quiggin. It's not Medium. Maybe it's the Age Online. I forget what it is. Where he basically says, if you stop and think about it, we've all learned to work from home. Now let's assume that all labour is fungible, right? It's not. Obviously, there are different levels of skill, etc. But really, wages aren't determined by that. They're determined by other factors, right? Unionisation, demand, etc. Right? But let's say that labour, in principle, when you add everybody into a big bag and divide it by the number of people in the bag, you get an average level of productivity. Now, let's say that everybody in the world used to commute an hour in and an hour out. Right? That's 14 hours a week, or 10 hours a week, right? So 10 hours a week, we're now no longer doing that. And we're actually getting to our desks at the same time. That means that everybody just got 14% more productive. Now, we haven't even begun to factor this into the stats, and who knows if it'll even show up in the stats, right? But we've already changed the way that we work. And if we decide to keep that, these big mega cities and co-presence and need to be there on FaceTime, what I've called elsewhere the pret-a-manger economy, right? Why go back to that? Because it was pretty crap, right?
Well, this is such an interesting point, because if you didn't have to live where you live, where would you live? If you didn't have to pay $1 billion in rent in New York, where would you go? I don't know that you're going to go to Duluth, Minnesota, but it's an interesting question to think about transferring that wealth that's concentrated in these parts and think, does it spread out more, or does it just go to Aspen?
But if we're in the one time zone, right? The United States has basically got 3 time zones. So you could be in any one of those time zones and still make it work, right? Even on your West Coast, it's a 3-hour difference. Yeah. So if somebody in LA wants to call me at noon, it's 3 p.m. You can make that work. And we have now proven that we can do this. So I think this, not just Duluth or not just Minnesota, but hey, being near the lakes, being near family, much cheaper cost structure instantly means higher real wages, a better distribution across the country in terms of wealth and income. There's loads of positives that could come out of that.
Well, and on thinking politically, maybe that starts to eat away at I get it, but I don't relate to it. Meaning that people's realities start to change, and it's not just the landscape of New York, but it becomes a landscape that's more familiar across the sort of partisan cleavages that we have. I don't know if you've been paying attention or not, but over the last few weeks, you've seen a number. Here's my segue into the protests from the professional sports, and that at one point, I think this was 2 weeks ago, the NBA had the teams decided to not play in some of the finals games, and that spread actually to baseball, which is mostly white. And now the start of the NFL season, the WNBA has been incredible in their continued protest, and the NFL has started with a much different audience than the NBA and the WNBA, and with lots of boos for players who are kneeling. So it will be, this is something that will be interesting just as a lover of professional sports to watch whether this becomes the storyline of the NFL or players start to back off on this as owners start to put more pressure on them.
No, absolutely. And not just owners. I mean, other players, other forces. So I've been getting texts, how like everyone's number is like now marketable. Why don't you sign up to my bullshit, right?
Yeah.
And I was getting these texts for a while, which is like, these players are a disgrace and Antifa is communism. And you're just like, what? What is this? And I was almost intrigued to like, tell me more, but it was like, no, just back off, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, absolutely. All this stuff gets weaponized. I saw a poll, I think it was last week, and I was trying to find it exactly before we started recording so I could get the exact figure. So I'm doing this by memory. This is about the collapse in support amongst Republicans, in particular for protests. Now, there's Pew stuff online you can find that basically says that even amongst Democrats, right, support for protest has fallen as the protests have continued, but it's still positive. And overall, it's still net positive. But if you go for registered Republicans, I think it was down to something like 9 or 7%.
Oh, jeez. Yeah.
Right? A huge... So again, what we've done is we've taken something that at one moment pretty much most Americans agreed on. The second outpouring or the second rebirth of American civil rights movement was a positive thing. Has, just like everything else, become weaponized.
Yeah.
Has become partisan.
And you think about those pictures, I mean, and you saw it on Twitter, the Portland protests, and they said it was one block that this was happening, where there were fires and, all sorts of terrible pictures coming out of that. But that became, and I'd be curious if that then becomes an intersection point where you start to see Republican approvals start to drop.
Yeah, no, I'm sure it is, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's all curated news sources. I mean, in fairness on the other side, I do remember like about, maybe it must have been about late March or early April when the protests were really gathering steam. There was a fantastic headline, I'm pretty sure it was The Guardian, that said something like 23 police injured in otherwise peaceful protest.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, what exactly does that mean?
Right. Well, and now peaceful protesters, I mean, at the RNC, that was like the derisive term for everything, right? You call it peaceful protests.
Right.
Well, as we wrap things up, anything lighter to add to our conversation? I've been living in the past because I know the past much better than I do the future. And so I was a big Detroit Pistons fan in the 90s. So I'm watching The Last Dance, which follows Michael Jordan's the Chicago Bulls as they try to pursue one last NBA champion victory. But there's tons of stuff with the Pistons in it. So I really love that. And that has been, reliving my childhood in a lot of ways. Have you been any good entertainment?
Well, hold on. Let's hold that for a minute and think about what you're doing there, right? I mean, in a way, Brexit is all about nostalgia.
Yeah.
This glorious past when Britain was blah blah blah, and if only we were more like that, right? Trump is all about nostalgia, right? Basically, it's when white people had good jobs and things were orderly, right? I mean, that's basically it, right?
Yes, people knew their place.
People were their way, exactly. That's pretty much what it is, right? Your law and order president.
Yep.
I mean, it's totally amazing. Like, he went from gassing people and walking up with an upside down Bible to actually making that real incredible for your relatives. I mean, in one way, you have to say the guy is a genius when it comes to the manipulation of media. But, continue on from there. What do we do in our private lives, right? What are we doing? We're looking at stuff from the 90s.
Yeah. It's so comforting.
Right, because, and that's really disturbing that the past is a better country.
Yeah. It was. It was just so nice, yeah.
But it's funny as well. I mean, if you think about, one of the genres that I do enjoy is science fiction. And while there's always been a dystopian element to that, and sometimes quite strong, it's always been about the possibilities of the future. And even the dystopian elements is usually about struggle against the dystopia in some sense, right?
Yeah.
And and the classic series for doing this, of course, has been Star Trek, right? Where it's the Federation, and we're always the good guys, and even when we're slightly more complicated. And now there's just a dearth of shows like that. It's not there. The hope isn't there anymore.
No,
if you think about what they're doing with superheroes and shows like I forget the name of the one, where basically they're all horrible bunch of people and they work in franchise basis, and then basically they've killed all these people and they get together to try and take them out. It's just dystopic.
But it's the nostalgia part is really that there's no. That's such an interesting point, and I thank you, therapist, as well.
You're welcome.
But to think, I mean, it is comforting, and it feels, the edges of all the like negative stuff and like climate change. This doesn't exist in the 90s yet,
right?
And so you can just
totally
live
doesn't.
there and just feel like, oh, this is like so wonderful, and not worry about the million different things that we have to. But all the shows are throwbacks or they're reboots from whatever, so there isn't anything new. Right. Yeah.
And my confession, which I confessed to you last time, I'm now finishing up season 2 of The Crown.
And how's it going?
Holy shit! I'm just getting into the 1960s.
I mean, she's still queen, right? Yeah,
she's still queen, and Princess Margaret is wonderfully mental. But apart from that, I'm still living in the 60s.
Yeah, so I'm slightly ahead of you then.
You are slightly ahead of me.
We need to. Yeah, I need to start. I am a lover of sci-fi stuff too, so I need to do like rewatch like Battlestar or something.
Yeah, because that was really uplifting.
Yeah, well, remember they start a new planet at the end, though, don't they? So I think it's okay.
They did by saying, let's abandon all our technology and basically breed with the indigenous animals, which is like, really? We came that far for this?
So we're just waiting for our spaceship to Mars, then?
Exactly. Well, apparently there's life on Venus.
Oh, okay, spaceship to Venus, then.
Exactly. All right, and with that hopeful segue to microbial life in the clouds of Venus, I'll have to say goodbye.
Yes, great. Well, we'll talk to you next time. Thanks for listening. See you soon.
Bye.
Bye.